Great to see everyone today. For those who don't know me yet, I am Ron Levine from Mindfulness and Blue Jeans. I've been practicing insight meditation and mindfulness for almost 25 years now, and I was introduced to it during a time when I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression, panic disorder, agoraphobia, all kinds of stuff that kept me housebound for a while on disability. And this practice has been the cornerstone of my recovery and my ability to live a life that was far better than even my normal life that I was having before things like anxiety and panic brought me down. And one of the things that I certainly noticed the most, and sometimes still do, right? It's not like I don't feel anxiety anymore, right? This practice isn't about never feeling things again. It's about learning how to manage what we feel skillfully. So something that I always noticed back in my darker days, as well as still sometimes today, is how difficult mornings can be. I like to offer some of the tools and techniques that I've been using for a couple of decades now for dealing with the kind of anxiety that I found comes up a lot in the morning, but also, anxiety doesn't care what time it is, right? So these work around the clock, or at least they have for me. And perhaps some of these techniques that I'm going through in this ongoing series, which I call Calming Anxiety by Living Mindfully, hopefully some of these will resonate with you as well. The one that we'll work on today centers on building some familiarity. One of the vicious cycles with anxiety is that we find uncertainty and unfamiliarity to be uncomfortable and anxiety-provoking because there could be danger there, right? This is something from our evolutionary background. Something that was unfamiliar could be unsafe. So what do we do when we have something that is unfamiliar, uncomfortable? Well, we kind of shy away from it. Which made sense back when our most common danger was the saber-toothed tiger out in the African savannah, right? But what if that thing is coming from inside and we shy away from it? Well, we never really have a chance to check out what it actually is. And we remain unfamiliar with it. And if we remain unfamiliar with it, we remain uncomfortable with it. And then we continue to avoid it and continue to remain uncomfortable with it. And you see how this just snowballs. A large part of this practice is opening to what's here. It's not the entirety of the practice. Sometimes we fall into this trap of thinking that's all there is just seeing what's here. There's more to it than that. There's seeing what's here. There's also seeing what we're doing with what's here. That cycle of avoidance and unfamiliarity, that isn't just something coming up. It's something coming up in what we're doing with it. What are we doing with it? We're avoiding it. And what's that causing? Well, the cycle to perpetuate. So simply building some familiarity with things that are uncomfortable in itself helps to remove some of that discomfort because we are removing some of the unfamiliarity, starting to see that, oh, this might be uncomfortable doesn't necessarily mean it's unsafe. So the technique that I want to work on this morning, which is one that some of you will be familiar with if you have been with me before, as I know some of you have been with me for a while. Some of you probably already know which one I'm going to be doing. just by my description. And we're going to work on building some familiarity with what's here. And when what we're doing with what's here is building familiarity, now we have a chance to find something new. And maybe short circuit, if not reverse, that vicious cycle that I was describing. Let's sit for a bit. Okay? I always like to begin my sitting by imagining that I am suspended from the ceiling by a string attached to the top of my head, as a nice cue to sit up straight without adding any extra tension to do so. And if there is some tension right now, as there often is for me at this hour of the day, that's completely fine. It's completely fine. There's no need to try to force any tension that might be here away. Tension is a form of communication. We can listen to what it has to say, and when it is ready, it will leave in its own time. That may be today, may not. I also like to notice what is in contact with the floor, or perhaps the chair, the cushion. Something is beneath me, supporting me. There's a sense of grounding there. Let's take a moment and notice what is grounding or supporting us at the bottom. And this gentle lift at the top. And whatever else happens to be in between the two for us right now. And if you haven't already, you may begin to bring your attention to your breathing. And similar with tension, we don't need to try to make any changes or interfere in any way with the breathing. We may often think that we need to have a certain kind of breathing in the meditation. We can do that. We do not have to. I personally have found it much more instructive to simply see what the breathing is like on its own. The body knows how to breathe. I don't have to do anything. I can simply watch. It's surprisingly challenging. I've also found it very rewarding. Probably because it's so challenging. So the technique that we'll work with today is the labeling technique. One of the challenges in this practice, which is kind of by design, is that when we sit, we observe the breathing, we open up, we're making space. And what happens when we make space? Well, things fill that space. And what usually fills that space? Thoughts. And sometimes we think we're not supposed to have any thoughts in this practice, which of course is just another thought. So we're not here to stop thinking, because good luck with that. But we can manage thinking. We can gain some familiarity with how we are thinking, what we are doing with the thoughts that arise. Labeling is a powerful technique. When a thought comes up, when we notice, we can simply slap a label on it. It can be very specific. Thinking about that thing I have to do today. Thinking about that person. Thinking about that thing I want. We could make it very general. I feel anxiety, feel dread, feel excitement, feel tired, feel hopeful. The key is every time a particular thought or a cluster of thoughts come up, we put that same label on it, again and again. Take a few moments and try that out. Stay anchored on the breathing. And if nothing's coming up, fine. But if and when something comes up, put a label on it. Every time. one of the challenges with working with thinking. We're so accustomed to chasing after certain thoughts, storylines we're writing. We get caught up. We forget. Especially when we're new. But even when we've been doing this for a while. So this is why we practice. And we may notice when we have fallen off into a daydream, into a storyline, perhaps on our own, or perhaps when I start talking again. And we may feel discouraged, like we're no good at this. And you know what? That's a thought, and that gets a label too. Whichever one you want to put on it. As we continue to work with this technique over time, some interesting things happen. We don't just begin to gain some familiarity with these thoughts and these thought patterns. We almost start to become a little jaded with them. Like, oh, geez, that's coming up again? Because we've shifted our focus from getting caught up in the content of those thoughts, and now we're looking at the process of how they just keep coming up. You start to see there's this almost absurd relentlessness to it. But it doesn't just happen that way. That's occurring again because things come up and we deal with them in certain ways. And now we are changing how we are dealing with it. And as part of that, we are seeing the results of how we've been dealing with it. What are those results? Well, the things just keep coming up. Why? Because we keep fueling them. Now we're doing something different. And they're going to keep coming back for a while because they're expecting us to fuel them because we've been doing it for so long. But now we're seeing that process play out and we're saying, well, good Lord, I mean, still? You? Again? We start to become disillusioned with that kind of thinking. Disillusioned. Because why do we keep engaging with the thinking in that unskillful way we've been doing? We think it's going to help somehow. But now that we're developing some clear seeing around it, we're saying, oh, you know what? That's not buying me anything. That's just making things worse. That's this process of gaining some familiarity, some clear seeing. And that buys us a little space. We get some breathing room, get a little space. What's really going on here? And what am I really doing with it? And it's going to take some practice. We didn't get to where we are overnight. We're not going to change it overnight. But we don't have to wait till we're at the end to feel the benefits of it. So I invite you as you go through your day. Notice when things come up. Just put the label on it. And yeah, it'll probably come up again. You put the label on it again. You have an unlimited supply of labels. They're free. And just see what happens. When you change what you're doing, what are the results? And then based on those results, you have an idea of maybe what to change next. This is karma. Learning how to alleviate our own suffering by manipulating causes and the effects that they bring skillfully. And this is how we build a path to our own freedom. Thank you, everyone. And let's take a quick look at the chat before we wrap up. Let's see if anybody has anything they'd like to put in, please do. How do you feel it but not fuel it to keep coming back? Yeah, isn't that the trick, though? Great question, Michelle. We run into a kind of catch-22 with that, because if we try too hard not to fuel it, we begin to fuel the attempt to not fuel. because we're trying so hard not to fuel something, and that in itself starts to become a problem. We start to chase our own tail on that. That's where this observation comes in, this choiceless awareness. What I have found is when there's a certain behavior pattern, particularly with thinking, that we want to change, we don't do that by intellect. We don't do that by saying, okay, I need to change this now. Because how many times, is there anybody listening to me right now who has ever not thought at some point, I need to stop thinking, right? Which of course is impossible because that's a thought, right? We can't tell ourselves stop thinking and then we stop thinking. I mean, it might work for 2 seconds, but I think of it as like the hot potato effect. Okay. If somebody hands us a hot potato, do we sit there and think, man, this thing's really hot, I should probably put this down and intellectually work it out? No, if someone hands us a hot potato, we immediately drop it. We don't have to think about that. There's a kind of clear seeing there. Of course, it happens so quickly, we don't think of it as clear seeing necessarily, but our body has a clear seeing there and is dropping that potato before our intellect can even catch up. You ever notice how something like that happens? You drop the potato, and even then, it takes a second for the pain to hit the brain. You haven't felt it yet. You stub your toe. You ever have that? Like you stub your toe and you're like, oh, this is going to really hurt in a second. It takes a second for it to reach the intellect, right? This is that same thing. I have found that when I begin to see patterns of what I'm doing, it doesn't feel like I'm doing it because it's so habitual, it's on autopilot, but I'm doing it. Somebody has to be doing it. I'm not causing your patterns, you're not causing mine. When I begin to see clearly enough, not intellectually, but at a felt sense, what I'm doing that's causing my own suffering, or I'm getting in my way, once I see that clearly enough, I don't need to talk myself into making changes. The changes just happen. The potato gets dropped. It's an automatic thing. So one of the challenges here is we don't want to try too hard. We don't want to send our energy in the direction of trying to stop something. We want to send our attention in the direction of seeing what we're doing as clearly as possible. In the process of doing that, letting go of these patterns is something that just happens, in my experience. Our challenge is to simply allow the clear seeing that allows that process of letting go to unfold on its own. Because we don't want to do that. We want to get rid of it now, right? Like, oh, I've seen the problem. This is the problem. Let's get rid of it. We want to fix. Unfortunately, that's not how these things resolve. So our challenge becomes to step back and say, let me just keep watching for a bit. And if it hasn't left yet, that's because there's more to see. So you can think of it as good news or bad news. Technically, we don't have to do anything to get rid of it. But we're going to want to. And then we just watch that pattern as well. That's just another pattern to watch. So I hope that helps. What else do we have here? How do we quiet anxiety manifestations like burning skin? Burning skin's an interesting one. I've never had that. That's an interesting one. I can talk about a different one that I have had and what I found. And in fact, it dovetails with what I was just saying. I came to this practice because of a raging anxiety and panic disorder. I was agoraphobic. I was stuck at home. I was on disability. Couldn't leave the house. And I had been fighting my own anxiety and panic for almost 10 years. And one of the reasons that I practice and teach not controlling the breathing is because I did hyper-vigilantly control my breathing for so many years when I was unskillfully dealing with my panic. And when I was introduced to this practice and the guidance was to simply watch the breathing as it was and let it be, I mean, that scared the crap out of me. It's like, I can't just let the breathing do whatever it wants. I might start to hyperventilate. I might start to have a panic. This is not acceptable. No. So it was very, very scary for me to simply sit and, I mean, it's terrifying to sit and just watch the breathing and let it do what it wanted. And what I found in those early sittings was when I did really allow the breathing to be, I started to feel this pulsation in my solar plexus. Even just talking about it, I'm touching the spot right now. It almost felt like a cross between a pulsation and a cramp. And it was very scary at first. It was a new sensation. And of course, it's really my heartbeat that I'm feeling. It is a pulsation. It's in line with my heartbeat, of course. And my heart rate was quite fast because I was very anxious. So there's this fast pulsation going on and reminded me of the kinds of sensations I might get during a panic attack, as you're calling it, a manifestation of anxiety. After a while, I started to realize, well, okay, in line with what I was saying earlier at the beginning, I started to notice, okay, this is uncomfortable. It doesn't appear to be unsafe. Because all of those things I'm worried about, geez, I'm not going to get enough air, I'm going to have a panic attack, I'm going to pass out, I'm going to die. None of these things were happening. And it's like, okay, I've been sitting here for a while with this. It's scary, it's uncomfortable. Not panicking, haven't passed out, don't appear to be dead. And said, all right, I guess I can hang out with this for a bit and see what happens. And a very funny thing did happen. What happened over the course of the next couple of weeks was I started to notice that anytime I felt that sensation, I realized, I only feel this at those times when I'm actually letting the breathing just be. And it went from being something scary and unfamiliar to being a signpost that I was on the right path. So my perception of it, my interpretation of it changed dramatically. And it went from being something that I initially considered a threat to something that was like a guide, a friend on the path. Like, hey, yeah, you're letting the breathing be. Here we are again. How's it going? After a couple of months, it went away. It just stopped. It said what it had to say. What changed was I listened. Labeling is very powerful in this area because it allows us to gain some of that distance that I was talking about. Because when we talk about these manifestations of anxiety, these physical symptoms of anxiety, when we can see that these are physical symptoms, we're beginning to tease apart these components of this thing that we call anxiety. Okay, there's a huge difference between I'm anxious. Okay, we're fully identified with this state. I'm anxious to I'm feeling anxiety. Now we're not tightly wrapped up one-on-one with it. I'm feeling anxiety. We've begun to identify with it as being us a little less. And what does that lead to? Well, that can lead to there is anxiety. Now we've taken the I out of it. We've gone from I'm anxious to I'm feeling anxiety to there is anxiety. Now recognizing that there's simply a process here. But we can take that a step further. He's like, there's a sensation here that I associate with this thing I call anxiety. Because is that physical sensation always anxiety? No. An accelerated heart rate, for example, that could be anxiety, that could be anger, that could be excitement, that could be joy. That could be you went out for a jog. All the same physical manifestation. Very, very different interpretations based on the context we're putting around it. Labeling can really help with that. Like I was saying as we went through it, we can be very, very general about it and slap a big label and just say, anxiety. Or we could get very specific and say, burning skin. Sensation of burning skin. And leave it at that. We don't have to build a context around it. We don't have to build a storyline around it. We don't have to let our past experiences and associations with it dictate what our current and future experiences and associations with it will be. Again, that's that line between what's coming up and what we're doing with it. What we're doing with it not only affects how we're going to experience it right now, it also affects what it's going to be like when it comes up again. And again, this is karma. In some of my talks on karma, you've heard me talk about this. Our karma is now. This is how we build our experience in the here and now. I hope that helps. Hi, Michelle. I see you have, acknowledging anxiety. Is that enough separation? Acknowledging is key. There's the acknowledgement of the anxiety as coming up. There's also the acknowledgement of what we're doing with it. There can also be an acknowledgement of why we're calling it anxiety. How do you know it's anxiety? I'm not saying it's not. Say, how do you know? How are you deciding? Or how are you labeling? Okay? Because this is a label. I'm acknowledging anxiety. Well, there's a label there, right? Calling it anxiety. Why? Based on what? Something to explore. How have I decided that this is the label for that? Right? There's a process of perception, a process of decision making. What's driving that? Last thing I'll say, because Farnad has a nice thing. I see everything gray as if anxiety filters everything into grays. Yeah, that's exactly it. And that's why this is a process of clear seeing. Sometimes I think of it in terms of those, when you were a kid, they had those, I always forget what they're called, but they were like those books where there'd be a picture and then you'd lay this colored, translucent paper over it that would like shade all the colors in it. And then there would be another one. You had all these layers of colored, translucent, and it would change the image. And it's like that. We're peeling the layers back. So all of the coloration that's coming through our lens of perception, experience, judgment, fear, that are coloring the experience, we start to pull those back. because those are the same things that are getting in our way. And that's that process of clear seeing. And that's how we start getting out of our own way. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.